Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of SAT Night Live. I'm your host, Jennifer McDevitt, coming to you live from New York City. Tonight we are going to be talking about punctuation. In particular, we're going to talk a lot about the semicolon, that really weird little mark that a lot of us don't know exactly when to use it, and the colon, its kind of cousin that a lot of people also don't know how to use. So let's take a look at some questions that involve these two punctuation marks. And just to distinguish between the two, we have our semicolon. It's like a little period with a comma under it. And then we have our colon. So it's a dot with another dot underneath of it. And in a few minutes, I'll break down kind of the difference of what they mean and when we use them as we get into the content here. So let's take a look at our first question, number 4, which reads, audiences customarily stand for the Hallelujah chorus of Handel's Messiah. It is said that on one occasion the king entered the hall at that point in the work, the audiences stood, and audiences have done so since. So if you remember from previous lessons, when we're doing grammar and we see our answer choices, we want to ask ourselves, what's changing in the answer choices? So in this case, we can see the punctuation's changing, right? So we have, there is our semicolon, and we have a comma and another comma, and up here, there's nothing going on over there. And we also have some words changing, right? We see the word when, and we also see the word however. So in this case, we want to figure out, well, what punctuation do I need? And that's where we can use a little test called the vertical line test. And I'm going to show you in just a moment how the vertical line test works. I'm going to write this down so you have this for yourself. Vertical line test. So what does that mean? Well, we want to draw a vertical line, a literal line that's vertical, in between some things to see if it's a complete or an incomplete idea. And why is this important? Well, the main reason that we're using a semicolon is to separate two complete ideas. So if I have a semicolon, I need to have a complete idea or a complete sentence that can stand alone. Then I can have a semicolon only if it's followed by another complete idea or complete sentence. It's not exactly the same for the colon. We'll get into that in a minute. But for now, if we were to use the semicolon, we would have to have two complete ideas that could each stand alone independently. You might have heard them called independent clauses. It doesn't matter what name you go by, as long as you understand that it's something that can stand alone and it's a complete sentence. So how do we do this? Well, we want to draw the vertical line in between where we see the punctuation changing. So in our answer choices is between Messiah and whatever the other words are. So we're going to draw this vertical line here right after Messiah. And we want to read the first part and ask ourselves, is it complete or incomplete? So it says, audiences customarily stand for the Hallelujah chorus of Handel's Messiah. That's complete, right? That can stand alone. But now let's look at the second part and ask ourselves, is that complete? It is said that on one occasion the king entered the hall at that point in the work, the audiences stood, and audiences have done so since. Okay, so that can also stand alone. So now we've got two complete ideas, and that means that we're going to need a punctuation that can stand in between those two complete ideas. Well, no change. In the way it's written now, there's nothing there. We need something to separate those two ideas, so we can get rid of choice F. Now choice G has something. We've got a comma, so there's a punctuation. It tells us the comma usually is slowed down, but in this case, a comma alone can't separate two complete ideas. That's going to be called a comma splice. You might have heard that term in your literature class when you're writing an essay and your teacher said, hey, that's a comma splice. Well, what does that mean? It means that you're using a comma to separate two complete ideas. You can separate two complete ideas if you have a comma with fanboys. So comma plus fanboys, which some of you may remember, are for and nor, but, or, yet, so. In choice G, we don't have a fanboy, so we can't use a comma to separate these two complete ideas. So choice G is out. Now we have however, comma however, in choice H. Comma however, it is said. Well, for one, we have a comma without a fanboy. However is not a fanboy, and that's not going to work, right? We don't even have to keep going. We're not following the rules of punctuation. And that leaves us with only choice J. So let's just put it back in and make sure everything's okay. When we put that semicolon there, it's a semicolon separating two complete ideas, and that's going to work. So that's our only answer choice, our only punctuation in the answer choices given that works to make this sentence correctly written. So let's take a look at another punctuation situation. So number 47 says, when our answers were right, we would scream with excitement, and when the contestants were wrong, we would moan with disappointment. All right, now we actually have a question after the written portion. And it says, which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? Now, whenever you see not, even though it's capitalized, underline it, circle it, put a big star next to it, because when we're doing multiple choice, generally we're looking for the correct answer, the one that works. So sometimes this sort of question throws us off because our brain starts thinking of the one that's going to work and we forget that it's saying, wait a second, which is not acceptable. So in this case, the way that the text is, it's correct as written. And now we want to look for which one doesn't work. And now looking, what's changing in our answer choices? Back again here, we see comma, we have a semicolon, a period, and then a comma. So we can use that vertical line test again because we see punctuation changing in the middle of the sentence. And when we go back to the text, we can look here and it says excitement, comma. So we're going to draw our vertical line after excitement, and we see that word and. And remember, that's one of those fanboys I just mentioned on the previous question. So if we see a fanboy, it's not part of either half of the sentence. So let's just cross it off and pretend it's not there. And we want to ask ourselves, is the first part complete or incomplete? So breaking it down again. When our answers were right, we would scream with excitement. That's complete. So now let's look at the next part. When the contestants were wrong, we would moan with disappointment. And that's also complete. So now we have two complete ideas. So what we need is a punctuation that can separate two complete ideas. What we don't want, the one that would not be acceptable, which would be our answer choice, the correct answer here, is the one that can't be used to separate two complete ideas. So looking here at our choices, we have A, excitement, comma, when. Well, this is one of those comma splices that I was just talking about, right? We have a comma and there's no fanboy. So that one doesn't seem to work, but let's take a look at the other choices to make sure. Now B says excitement, semicolon. Well, from the last question, we know that a semicolon is great for separating two complete ideas. And the wording's the same, right? We see semicolon, when, so that means the rest of the sentence is exactly the same as written above. So that checks out, it's acceptable, so we can cross that off because it's not the one that's not acceptable. You see what they did there? They make it so wordy and complicated and confusing. So you need to just take your time and make sure you're running through all of the answer choices carefully. Now we have choice C, and we've got a period. Well, a lot of people are pretty strong with periods, right? We use a period at the end of a complete sentence. And we already know we've got a complete idea and then another complete idea. And the second one starts with a capital W, so that's okay. So in this case, we can cross off choice C, because B and C are pretty much identical. No, a semicolon is not exactly the same as a period, but they serve the same function. They both separate two complete ideas. And now our last one here, choice D. Excitement, comma, or. Guess what? We've got a fanboy. Or is the O in fanboys. So we have a comma or, and that's going to be okay, because that can be used to separate two complete ideas. So choice D, just like C, is acceptable and is therefore not the correct answer, which means that A is the correct answer because using a comma in between the two complete ideas is not acceptable. Looking here at number 1, now we have Jonah, the valedictorian of his senior class, believes that only one factor contributed to his success in school: his commitment to hard work. Okay, what's changing in our answer choices? Again, punctuation. That's what we're doing tonight. That's the theme. And now we see another punctuation. We see that colon that I'd mentioned. So here's a good time to explain, when do you use a colon? And this, in my own experience teaching and tutoring, is one of the least understood rules out there. What has to come before a colon? What always has to come before a colon and is very often not done correctly is a complete idea. We always have to have a complete idea or a complete sentence before the colon. So if I say the list is colon, milk, eggs, bread, and bread, that's not right. The list is colon, because the list is not a complete idea. So if I'm going to use that colon, that first part has to be complete. Remember that. Now what comes after it, it may be complete or it might be incomplete. So what does that mean? Well, there are several things that can come after that complete idea, and they have to be related to the first half of the sentence. And the most common things that you're going to see are going to be some sort of list. My list is short, colon. Let's write this. My list is short. Now I can use the colon because I've got a complete sentence. Colon, milk and eggs. Okay, and let's pretend that this is a capital M here. All right, so that's one example. We can have a list. We might have a detail, something that's detailing or elaborating upon the first part of the sentence, and it might be some sort of explanation. And I'm gonna run out of space here. All right, so in my example that I wrote down here, it's not a complete sentence. We could say, like the previous one, here, it's slightly different with two complete ideas, how there's this juxtaposition of there's screaming with excitement versus moaning with disappointment. Now, that's a slightly different use, but you might see something like, I'm so tired. And then you might see after that, colon, I was studying for the SAT all night. I was studying for the SAT all night. I'm going to say all capital letters, all night. Now we see an example of a complete sentence and then another complete sentence, and that colon is separating them. Okay, so it's similar to a semicolon sometimes. Now, getting back to the question, we can use our vertical line test and we see the punctuation is changing after the word school. So let's draw our line there. And the first part of the sentence says, Jonah, the valedictorian of his class, believes that only one factor contributed to his success in school. That can stand alone. That's a complete idea. Now the next part, as written, says his commitment to hard work. That's not a complete sentence. There's no verb in there. It's just commitment to hard work, which is great, but it can't stand alone as its own idea. And we see a semicolon in choice A, so A is out because semicolons only separate two complete ideas. Guess what? B is not automatically out. And here's why. Now in B, we have that semicolon, but make sure you read carefully because now it says, and it was. And it was. And it was his commitment to hard work. So it was his commitment to hard work. Well, it was his commitment to hard work. We've got a verb, and it seems like it might work. So let's hang on to that and then look at our other two answer choices. So choice C says school colon. And the rest of this sentence here is not underlined. I'm underlining it, but in the text it's not. His commitment to hard work. Again, we know that that's not a complete idea. So this is expounding upon the first part of the sentence, and that is using the colon, the dot dot, not semicolon, the dot dot colon, correctly. So we can keep this one. And then choice D, again we have colon, now it says being his commitment to hard work. Well, being his commitment to hard work, that's kind of awkward. We've got that ing going on. So between B, C, and D, D is kind of funky. We can get rid of that one. But let's go back to B. Between B and C, and it was. Well, one thing that we're looking for on the SAT is concise. So based on that, C is going to be shorter, more concise, straight to the point. So that's going to be our correct answer there. Choice C. Nice, sweet, and simple, and using the colon correctly. So it's not going to be choice B, and C is the correct one. So that's a lot of information there to digest. That colon has very commonly been misused for many, many years, and many people don't understand the rules. So just write that down if you haven't already, that you have to have that complete idea before a colon always. And that what follows can be complete or incomplete. So let's take a look at another question. Now, if we jump to our answer choices, we see, again, we have a colon over here, and then we've got a period and a semicolon and an exclamation point. So what's changing in our answer choices? The punctuation. Let's go ahead and read the sentence, and then we'll do our vertical line test. So Coach K has led Duke to 5 NCAA basketball championships. 2 in 1991 and 1992, 1 in 2001, 1 in 2010, and 1 in 2015. Drawing that vertical line right after championships, right? Because that's where we see the punctuation changing. First part of the sentence, Coach K has led Duke to 5 NCAA basketball championships. That's complete. Let's mark it up, complete idea, complete sentence, it can stand alone. Now this next part, 2 in 1991 and 1992, 1 in 2001, 1 in 2010, and 1 in 2015. That can stand alone. That's a list of things. Oh, sorry, that's not complete. That is incomplete. All right, so that means that we do not want a semicolon, right? That semicolon, our friend, is not going to work out here because that can only be used to separate the two complete ideas. So looking here, down our answer choices, let's get rid of C because there's a semicolon. And we can also get rid of B because there's a period, which again has the same function as a semicolon. Now between A and D, D has an exclamation point, which also comes at the end of a complete sentence. So we could say, Coach K has led Duke to 5 NCAA basketball championships, right? And have that excitement going with the exclamation point. But now if we look at the second part, 2 in 1991 and 1992, there's no verb. That second part just can't stand alone, so it doesn't work. And that means choice A is correct. And this is an appropriate use of the colon following a complete sentence, but preceding a list of things. And in this case, it's a list of years when this coach led the team to the championships. So let's try another one. Now this is a big block of text here. So let's look at our answer choice. Let's start there. And the answer choices now are a little bit longer. It's getting a little bit more complicated, but we see that what's changing, we have our punctuation is changing again. Here there is no punctuation at all in D. And in the way that it's written originally, we have a period and then a capital letter. So let's go ahead and read the actual sentence, which says, although we think of this film as a classic, when it was released, it represented an enormous departure from the prevailing standards for animation. So we saw punctuation changing, which means let's try that vertical line test. And again, we want to put it where the punctuation is changing. So in this case, it's going to be after the word classic. Now the first part of the sentence says, although we think of this film as a classic. And it's like, okay, finish that thought. Well, we can't. That's not a complete thought because of the word although. So many times when we see a sentence beginning with words like although or until, it'll make a sentence incomplete. It can't stand alone. So this first part, let's mark it as incomplete. Now let's look at the second part. When it was released, it represented an enormous departure from the prevailing standards for animation. Well, that can stand alone. And notice that in your answer choices, some of them have the word when, and choice B only has the word it. So you want to read very carefully, make sure that you don't miss anything. What we do know is we have an incomplete idea and a complete idea, which means we don't want to use a period or a semicolon or a comma fanboy or anything that can come in between two complete ideas because of that incomplete idea. So we can get rid of choice B, right? Because that has our semicolon. And we can also get rid of choice A because that has the period. So now between C and D, what's the difference? Well, C has some commas and D doesn't have any commas going on. So we need to ask ourselves, is there a reason to slow down these ideas? Well, for one, it's a really long sentence. There's a lot of words going on there. So let's see what happens if we read it without slowing down at all. Although we think of this film as a classic when it was released, it represented an enormous departure from the prevailing standards for animation. Oh, that was a mouthful. So it feels like we should probably slow down somewhere. And now when we look at choice C, we have classic. So the introductory clause would say, although we think of this film as a classic, that's a nice place to breathe or pause. When it was released, so we have another comma here, after released, it represented an enormous departure from the prevailing standards for animation. That's very nice. That slows things down. That when it was released part is offset by commas, and that is going to work out for us. Whereas D just doesn't have that comma, doesn't have any punctuation to slow us down and pause our ideas as we're going through. Also, you could get rid of this chunk here when it was released, because it's being offset by commas, and it would still be okay as written in the sentence. It would say, although we think of this film as a classic, it represented an enormous departure from the prevailing standards for animation. So that's another comma rule that I'm not going to get into tonight, but it's unnecessary information, so we can offset that by commas. So those are all the reasons why choice C is the only answer choice that works here. So going to number 7. Now we see comma, semicolon, comma, 3 commas and a semicolon. So we see our punctuation changing. Now let's take a look at this sentence. It says, just like the traffic sounds, though the noise on the bus represents people working, relaxing, and living. So if we were to do our vertical line test on this one, we would do it after the word people. So let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. Just like the traffic sounds, though, the noise on the bus represents people. Well, that'd be complete. And now what comes after? Working, relaxing, and living. Definitely not complete. That's incomplete. So what are we going to do with this one? It's also a list of things. People, what are they doing? They're working, relaxing, and living. All right. So we definitely want to get rid of the one with the semicolon, right? Because we don't have 2 complete ideas. So we can get rid of choice C. Now, looking at A, B, and D, they all have commas. And we want to think about where should we put them? Well, if we look even more closely, choice B has another semicolon going on here after working. Well, if we look at what comes after working, it's just relaxing and living, not complete. So B's got to be out, and now we're down to 2. You've got a 50-50 shot here. But let's read closely and see which will be the correct answer. So people, comma, working, or people, no comma, working. Well, if we put a comma, it would be represents people, comma, working, comma, relaxing, comma, and living. So the list would be 4 things. It would be people, working, relaxing, and living. But that seems kind of funny, right? Because it's the people who are working, relaxing, and living. So D is not going to be correct because that would make people part of that list of things. So the only one that works is going to be choice A. People, working, relaxing, and living. And just one thing to point out, you see the comma before the and. And it's correct as written, remember, if it's not underlined. So when you're doing things on the SAT, if you have a list of 3 or more things, you're always going to put your comma before the word and in some cases before the word or, if there are 3 things in that list. So, next question here. Number 11. Shortish answer choices going on here. Punctuation changing again. So we want to go ahead and see, well, what's going on. Let's read the question. People watching is one of my favorite things to do. I like listening even better. All right. So, vertical line test. Let's give it a try. Draw that vertical line after the word do. People watching is one of my favorite things to do. Complete idea. Let's mark that down. I like listening even better. Okay, also complete. Each of these ideas can stand alone. What can we get rid of? Anything that does not separate 2 complete ideas. So now we need our comma with a fanboy, we need a semicolon or a period. So let's take a look. Choice A is just comma, and that's our comma splice again. We don't have a fanboy after that, so that comma is not going to work in between 2 complete ideas. Now, choice B, do, comma, nevertheless. Again, there's no punctuation to stop and put a full stop in between those complete ideas. There's no period, there's no fanboy. Nevertheless is connecting them, but it's not a proper fanboy, so that doesn't work. Let's get rid of that. And now we're down to the last two. Do, comma, but, and do, comma, however. So in terms of transition, they're both showing a opposite direction, right? But, however, I like going running, but I'm really tired. I could also say, I like going running, however, I'm really tired. So it's not the word that we're looking at here. We're looking at the function. So remember, if we have a comma and it's separating those two complete ideas, it's gotta have a fanboy. And however, again, to reiterate, because we saw this earlier, however is not a fanboy. So D is out and C is the only one that works. Okay, so let's try one more. It's a lot of commas and semicolons and colons and lots of rules, and you've got all summer to practice. If you're taking the August 24th SAT, you've got some time. So remember your rules, write them down. So our last question for tonight, again, punctuation changing in our answer choices. And the question says, it was a top priority for Jonah to do well in school, but his love of friends, family, and sports were just as important. What? That sounds kind of funny. I felt weird reading that too, and as you're skimming through some sentences in your book, or your test booklet when you're taking it, you might be like, huh? It's totally possible. So when you have a huh moment, definitely read carefully. Don't automatically cross it off. You might want to go back and read it a second time, but since we see our punctuation changing, let's do our vertical line after the word school. So, it was a top priority for Jonah to do well in school. That's a complete idea. But his love of friends, family, and sports were just as important. Again, that sounds even weirder the second time, especially when we read it alone. Okay, well, that's just funky and it can't stand alone, but you also want to take a look here at your answer choices, because this by his is underlined, which means it's not part of this stuff on the right. So we want to look at what these words that are part of the answer choices are. And remember the fanboy words like but, we don't count them as either half of the sentence. So his love of friends, family, and sports were just as important. That will be complete, right? And now let's look at C, same thing. His love of family, friends, and so on. And the last one, whereas love of friends, family, something's missing there, so it's not going to be D. So we can get rid of A and D at this point. And now we're down to B and C. So we know we can have a comma fanboy separating two complete ideas. And like we said, with the his here, before love, that second part is complete. And it's also complete in choice C. And we know a colon sometimes can separate two complete ideas. So functionally, we need to figure out which is the better choice. Let's go back and read the sentence again, because we're going to have to look at the context now. It was a top priority for Jonah to do well in school. His love of friends, family, and sports were just as important. So we've got the word but in one and no word but in the other. And that's where it's really going to come down to figuring out which is correct. But is one of those transition words that shows the opposite direction. So do we see some sort of a contrast? Well, we do, because it's saying the sentence, he wants to do well in school, but, however, he also found his friends, family, and sports important. So the answer for this is going to be choice B, because it's showing a contrast. While one thing, it's important to do well in school, he also has this love for friends, family, and sports that's very important. So C is not correct, because when we have that colon, remember the idea of an explanation? Saying that his love of friends, family, and sports were just as important isn't explaining that school's a top priority. So it's not quite the right relationship there. So although function-wise, the colon works between the two complete ideas, we need to go a little bit deeper. So some of the questions are trickier. And remember, there's no order of difficulty on the writing and language section on the SAT. So this is a number 2. It could be the hardest question on the entire test. We can't say. The only section that does have an order of difficulty on the SAT is the math section. All right, so lots of rules to cover tonight. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more, you have more clarification on how to use that semicolon, end colon, and even the comma. We are going to be taking a break from SAT Night Live for the summer, but don't worry, we'll be back in September. You don't have to take a break from your test prep. Head over to princetonreview.com to check out our courses and tutoring selections. If you happen to be in New York City and maybe you have a younger sibling prepping for the SHSAT, definitely take a look at our courses that we're going to be offering all over New York City starting next month. All right, guys, that's all for now. Happy studying. Good luck for all of you taking the August SAT, and I'll see you all in September.